Today on the Melbourne Report, freedom of speech or freedom to say what you like. Andrew Bolt faces a music and we discuss the media's reaction to the court decision. Ted Baillieu visits China to extend brand Victoria. And of course, well, it's grand final day tomorrow, so how big a role does the AFL really play in Melbourne? On Sky News and the Melbourne Channel, the Melbourne Report begins now.
From the Sky News Melbourne studios in South Bank, this is the Melbourne Report with Ahron Young.
Hello and welcome to the program. Also today, reversing safely, another toddler dies from a tragic car accident in Melbourne. We'll discuss the issue. But first to this week's panel, the Institute of Public Affairs Tim Wilson, the Victorian Sports Minister Hugh Delahunty, and Monash University journalism lecturer Matt Mitchell. Thanks for joining us, guys. But we start this week with Andrew Bolt. He has his own show, so he's not coming on our show today. But he said in yesterday's Herald Sun that this is a sad day for free speech. He says that he is shocked and he can't believe that this is happening here. Now, Bolt is a pioneer in Australia in the new breed of people who say what they think. Once it was only talk radio host, but today opinion lights up the airwaves and newspaper columns right across the world. It began with Rush Limbaugh in the United States, but now telling some sections of the community what they want to hear has become the norm. But is it good for journalism, and what's the impact of this federal court decision? We'll start with you on this one, Tim Wilson. Do you think that this is about attacking minorities, or do you think this is about attacking free speech?
Well, the court decision is actually about attacking free speech, and unfortunately the justice went even further than he was reasonably, I think, allowed to do so with relation to the law. It's a bad law from the outset in terms of saying that people somehow have a right to be offended and that can silence people's free speech, but then to look at things like tone and context as a dimension of what people can say, where a court of law can then come and say you can't say that because we don't find it appropriate, is an outrageous attack on free speech, and every journalist in this country should be worried.
I'll ask you about this, Minister. In regards to, do you think that someone should be able to have a microphone or a widely read blog and simply be able to say whatever they want and perhaps cause offence to people, and those people, should they or should they not have a course to be able to fight back?
Look, I think we all agree with free speech in society, particularly in Australia. We're a very democratic country, but at the end of the day there are laws out there. But in relation to the fine detail of this, I think I'll do a Julia Gillard on this one and say that there is an appeal process, I believe, that's going to happen. So I've got to be a little bit careful what I say as a legislator, but I'm a strong believer in free speech.
Matt, what are your thoughts on this one? Do you think that the court's got it right? Do you think the courts are the right place for this sort of debate to happen? And given the tone of Andrew Bolt since the decision has been made, do you think getting him to say sorry is even going to work?
Well, I think it's something. Well, he clearly has to say sorry. I mean, that was the finding. Unless they appeal, that's the finding of Justice Bromberg. But to say that it's a play on free speech, I think, is interesting. That's pretty much where HWT and Andrew Bolt were going. They were going for the free speech angle, and they were appealing Section 18D of the Racial Discrimination Act. Now, the interesting thing is what Justice Bromberg found is not so much that it was about free speech. What he found that there were factual errors, and that basically meant that Bolt's entire argument, the entire basis of saying that it was about free speech, was built on a house of sand. And essentially, as a journalist, he got his story factually incorrect, and Justice Bromberg found that, and that's where it all came unstuck. So the entire free speech argument was a shambles.
No, that's a complete rubbish, actually.
No, it's not. That's actually what was in there.
No. The fact is you don't actually need, and this is not in any way a defence of people putting incorrect information into an argument, but the reality is having free speech also allows people the right to sometimes get things wrong, and that isn't a justification to then hold
in a publication as a journalist. He is expected as a journalist to get his facts right.
There is no basis in which to then drag somebody off to a court and silence them on a particular issue because they got the facts wrong.
When it's read by 1.3 million people, and he got his facts wrong. As a journalist, he got his facts wrong.
About what they choose to do. And yes, that's entirely legitimate. And the paper might want to reprimand him for that. He put his credibility in his pen when he wrote those articles.
Correct.
He got those wrong. But it's not appropriate to be hauled off to a court and then be told that they can't write about topics because they got a fact wrong.
But if you look at Section 30 of Justice Bromberg's summary, he actually said that it wasn't the matter that was the problem. It was the manner in which it was actually treated.
Exactly.
And that is exactly right.
Tone and context are not a justification.
That's got nothing to do with free speech.
Well, absolutely it does.
Okay, I'll ask you this one, Hugh. Justice Bromberg, he said, at the core of multiculturalism is the idea that people may identify with and express their racial and ethnic heritage free from pressure not to do so. What happens with if people disagree with that? Should they be able to speak out?
I think look, at the end of the day, as I said before, we are a very democratic country, more so than anyone around the world. But at the end of the day, we welcome free speech, but it's important that we do comply with the Racial Vilification Act. And now there's going to be a controversy over whether it has been broken or whether it is there. So again, it'll be through the courts and probably through the High Court. There'll be probably an appeal. So I'll wait to see what the outcome is.
And Tim, with Andrew Bolt, just in regards to his reputation, and I think his office is about 2 floors up from here, so we should be careful of what we say, or he will make an appearance on the show today.
Exactly
there we go. But just in regards to Andrew Bolt, though, my question is, will it turn people off his column, or will it rally the troops and help people go towards him?
I suspect on balance it's going to rally the troops and draw a lot of people towards him. There are a lot of people who are deeply concerned about this decision.
Which probably isn't what the courts or the plaintiffs actually wanted.
No, and you know, on a political dimension, I wouldn't have come up with this decision, but it has to be a legal dimension, so that's a different thing.
And Matt, I'll ask you as someone who teaches journalism, do you think that there has been, over the past 5 years perhaps, as I mentioned, it started in the United States, do you think there has been a shift towards opinion from actual journalism, and do you think that is a good way to sell newspapers and to sell the media in general?
There has been. I mean, look, particularly newspapers have their backs against the wall, and in America, etc. If there is a market for it, there's nothing wrong with opinion. Hard news, obviously, you know, when it comes to that sort of reportage, there is no place for opinion. But in opinion pieces, there's no problem with it. Equally, there's no problem with having a conservative opinion. And I really get upset when I see an extensive amount of media coverage really picking on some of the conservative writers. They do have a place, they do have an audience, and that annoys me that they seem to be the ones that are picked on. Equally, when Andrew Bolt actually left the court and he was called a serpent and hissed and booed at, that kind of behaviour is just not on.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on. It's the biggest week of the year in Melbourne, and tomorrow is, of course, the biggest day. Football has come to identify Melbourne, which has made the league both powerful and also dangerous to get on the wrong side of. This week, the clubs and the AFL came out against greater restrictions on poker machines. And so the question is the Gillard government on the wrong side of the AFL? Minister, I'll ask you on this one. Do you think that the AFL's got it right here? Are they going head-to-head with the government?
Well, I think it's not only the AFL. NRL have also made comment about it. At the end of the day, I think that we all know there is problem gambling out there. It's about how we deal with that. We took a policy to the last election where we would, in relation to pre-commitment, would be voluntary, and it would be on all machines, The Wilkie proposal is not on all machines, it is on some of the machines. So it really hasn't gone the length that we've gone to. And at the end of the day, some of these people, you can set a higher limit than what you really want to do. So again, when you put a pre-commitment and say, right now, don't want to lose any more than $2,000, when the reality is you can probably only lose $500 or less, that's a nonsense. So at the end of the day, we think it needs to be more work done, and we had a bipartisan post. No, look, I think well, we're going to be a little bit tougher. Like the government's going to be a little bit tougher. As from July next year, there won't be any ATMs in gaming venues. So we've gone a little bit further in some areas. But at the end of the day, like whether it be the AFL, NRL, or a lot of venues across Victoria, that there is concern about the approach being taken by Andrew Wilkie and the federal government.
Tim, I'll push this one onto you because in a way it's almost similar to the free speech, the freedom to choose what you want. At what point does the government come in and say, there are people who have problems here? Is the AFL and other clubs relying on people who have a gambling problem for them to try and pay the bills?
Well, firstly, I think actually there's a gross misrepresentation about the revenue sources in which clubs actually draw from problem gambling. The reality is it's nowhere near the majority and much less. What I think will actually happen under mandatory pre-commitments, it'll stop people like me going in who put $10 once every second month or even less frequently into a machine because they have to go and then get registered and everything else. So I think there is actually a very legitimate argument about the business model and impact it will have on AFL clubs. And I think the Gillard government is dead wrong in introducing this scheme. Firstly, it's a state issue, not a federal issue, and should be dealt with that way. And what should also happen is we should provide counselling and support for people who have a problem, but we shouldn't punish everybody because unfortunately there are some people who obviously can't control their addiction in the same way we don't with alcohol or anything else.
Matt, just quickly.
Well, on that topic, the NRL actually has a much deeper connection to poker machines than what the AFL do. The NRL, some clubs are up to 80% reliant on the revenue to keep those clubs afloat. Now, the AFL is completely different. As of next year, due to the change, the duopoly actually being removed here in Victoria, the reason why the AFL has to get involved now is because clubs like Carlton, for example, God bless them, will go from, may they rule forever.
They need someone's help.
They don't need any. Look, as of next year, they clearly won't need help. Good old Carlton. They'll go from, thanks to Bruce Matheson, they will have control from 60 to 260 poker machines. So their revenue stream will go up to about $10 million. Now, that's the type of thing that's why the AFL has gotten involved, because as of next year, the clubs will have a greater reliance on poker machines. But again, not to the same degree as what the NRL does. It's do or die for them.
And just quickly, I'll ask the three of you, do you think the AFL has become bigger over the past couple of years, or do you think the media is covering it more and more? To the point, I think we're seeing that the AFL is at the moment having difficulty trying to sell grand final tickets to tomorrow's game. Has that ever happened before?
Well, I don't think it's ever happened before, but the reality is it has gotten bigger, but it plays an enormously important role in society. But obviously, people are suffering the cost of living pressures, and very expensive tickets are hard to afford.
Pass it down the panel.
Look, I think the AFL is a big organisation, but there are many sports in Victoria, and we, as Minister for Sport and Recreation, I'm proud to be representing those people here today. But this is a big week, the AFL Grand Final week, and I've got no doubt that they'll sell all the tickets. There is enormous interest in this game. Geelong and Collingwood. I wish Essendon were there, but unfortunately it's Geelong and Collingwood, and I'm still crying. Carlton. But at the end of the day, look, they'll sell all the tickets. It'll be a super game at the MCG tomorrow.
Emma?
Well, we need to recognise exactly how big the AFL is for Victoria. They contribute, there was a study by Victoria University about 2 years ago, they contribute about $1.7 billion to the economy, provide 4,000 jobs. I mean, it's no small player when it comes to it.
That's just it, isn't it?
I think, and that's an important thing to consider, that it is actually a critical business here. It's not just part of the culture, it's actually part of the business structure of the state.
Okay. Well, Loretta Johns will be out tomorrow with all the latest from the MCG for Sky News. Keep an eye on that. It's a massive day, but not everyone throws the barbie on and sits in front of the plasma, so Susan Wilson went out to find out what Melbourne will be doing tomorrow on Grand Final Day.
Well, it's grand final weekend in Melbourne, and it really is one weekend where footy fever just takes over the city. Despite the weather, the wind and the rain, we've got footy fans out everywhere. You can see Collingwood and Geelong memorabilia stuck up all over the streets and celebrations in every storefront. But is it possible? There are some people out there who simply don't care. We hit the streets of Melbourne to find out what you think. How will you be spending the big day, and will you be watching the game? Will you be watching the grand final this weekend?
Probably.
And how will you be celebrating?
Celebrating? I don't think I'll be celebrating. I'll just be hoping that Collingwood doesn't win.
I might flick back and forth.
Certainly will. Absolutely.
And how will you be spending the day?
Oh, with family. Family and friends down at Phillip Island.
In the morning we'll have a look at a bit of lunch and then straight into the footy after, okay?
Watching it with friends at the pub.
I don't watch football generally, but I'm there screaming.
I won't. I believe my wife won't let me.
Potentially, but I'm not a big footy supporter, actually.
No, I've got a wedding on. So how will you be spending the day?
The day will consist of some study, typical uni student, and some work.
Absolutely. Collingwood supporter, hence black and white.
And how will you be spending the day?
Having a barbecue, grand final barbecue. It's the Aussie tradition.
How will you be spending the day? Do you think you'll be at home?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
And who do you want to win?
Geelong!
Susan Wilson there. Don't forget the Melbourne Report goes to air on Friday on Sky News at 2:30 Melbourne time and plays across the weekend on the Sky News Melbourne channel. Still to come on the Melbourne Report, the Premier visits China and reversing the tragedies, another death by car for a 2-year-old boy. The Melbourne Report returns after this. And we are back. Welcome back to the Melbourne Report on the eve of the grand final. A reminder of our panel today, the Institute of Public Affairs Tim Wilson, the Victorian Sports Minister Hugh Delahunty and Monash journalism lecturer Matt Mitchell. Thanks guys. Tourism, wine and a $2 billion contract for a Victorian plastics maker, the highlights of Ted Baillieu's trip to China this week. So we asked the panel, what can Victoria gain from a better or closer relationship with the Chinese? Hugh, I'll start with you on this one. I asked you during the commercial break, is this just a junket?
No way, no way. This would have been a very busy schedule for the Premier and the people over there. We've got to remember that China is our biggest trading partner, and when I looked at the figures, it shows in the last 30 years their population has grown by 450 million. It's anticipated to grow by another 100 million in the next 10 years.
But what can Victoria get out of it?
Well, Victoria can do a lot. We can provide a lot of food to them. From an agricultural point of view, we can provide a lot of education opportunities. And importantly, it could be a good tourism outlet for them to come here to Australia. You know, it's a different climate up there. You know, they come to the southern part of the world. If we can get a couple of % of their people coming down here as tourists, we will bring a lot of dollars into Australia. So not only from an economic development point of view, but also from a linkage in relation to education programs, planning programs, agricultural programs. We've got a lot to offer for the Chinese, and it's important we have a good trading relationship with them. And no doubt the Premier would have been there. He would have just landed in Shanghai. He could have looked out his tall statue. He could have looked out over a lot of millions of people there. So he would have been a sensation.
I thought you were saying he had a tall statue in Shanghai. I thought that was
he stands very tall. He's 6'7". He's a big guy. So
Matt, I'll ask you just in regards to the tourism aspect, because so much of Victoria's tourism is based on our major events, our sporting events, our cultural events, which seem to be for the American and the European market. Should we start looking at events which may be more attractive to the Asian market?
When China looks at Australia, they look at us more as a quarry and a farm. Now, Victoria isn't exactly a quarry. We're not Queensland, we're not WA. So I think it's actually critically important for the Premier to actually go to China and to be able to promote those things like tourism, like wine, like our agricultural produce. And I don't think that he should really be vilified for it. It's not a junket, and it's his third trip there, and I actually think he's done a pretty good job to go over and sign a $2 billion deal, as you said. And he's an emissary for the state, and so he should be.
Tim, your thoughts?
We don't sell much coal to China. That's actually New South Wales and Queensland, because we have a very wet coal and therefore can't export it. So, but the other issues, I agree with everything that has basically been said so far. If you understand China, what really matters is hierarchy and relationships, and what the Premier will be getting out of this meeting is exactly to have the head of the state meeting with equivalents in China and to be building those relationships. There are a lot of trips that are junkets, but the reality is in engaging with China in building those relationships, you actually do need to send the head of the state over
Speaking of the head of the state, I have to point this out. When the Premier went to go and sit down, there was a name plaque and a photograph of a smiling John Brumby, so perhaps for cultural issues the message may not have got through. But I suppose that there isn't much that can be bad gained from getting a closer relationship with China. What is the relationship like now?
Oh, the relationship now is, I think, relatively healthy, but you know there are always tensions and opportunities for tensions, and it's exactly as was pointed out before. I mean, Victoria already exports various things to China, but there's always opportunities. China's developing its internal education market. We need to make sure that we're competitive so that Chinese students continue to come to Australia and learn. There are obviously a lot of agricultural exports that are already going through in processed foods, but it needs to grow, and there are enormous opportunities, and everybody else is in there. We need to be in there too.
Hugh, just quickly, the Premier in China, do you think we'll see more overseas trips, or is this going to be a Premier that focuses on domestic relationships?
Look, I'm not sure about that. Ted's very focused on what's doing here domestically, but importantly, I think we need to have those linkages, as Tim said, with China. And I want to highlight that you've got to remember it was a young Chinese lady, Lin Na, played off in the final here of the Australian Open last year. So there was enormous television coverage went into China, and I'm sure they are growing in a sporting statue, and there'll be stronger links. As Minister for Sport, I want to see that happen, and maybe there'll be an opportunity for more Chinese to come down here and play in our great Australian Open coming up this January.
You just want a trip to China now,
don't you? No, I'm not worried about that. I just want to see the opportunity for Australians to play at the highest level, and we need to play against whether it be Chinese, Swedish players or anything like that.
Well, I think there are footy clubs that actually do test AFL games in China as well.
Well, we do that, and we had the International Cup here only a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago. So it's AFL football. The brand is getting right around the world, but it is a great connection, and it's important we build on what has been established. And I am sure the Premier would have done some great work over there.
Okay, well, a change of tone now. There was another tragedy involving a toddler this week. This time it happened at Sorrento. It happened on Tuesday night when a mother accidentally hit the accelerator while parking, killing the young boy, pinning his grandfather, her father, to the house. Now, the coroner's court tells us that toddlers account for almost 70% of all fatal driveway incidents. They had a big campaign in March this year, but is there anything that can be done to stop it? I'll start with you on this one. This is a really difficult issue, isn't it?
It is, and look, the reality is in every single circumstance, the government can't be there to somehow save a child. It's a tragic situation. What's actually probably best going to solve these sorts of situations is technology, whether it's sensors on cars, whether it's cameras at the rear, those sorts of things are going to be the best
That's
defence.
never going to stop an erratic child. And
Exactly,
the simple fact of the matter is if you have a child, you cannot account for where that child is at all times, and you must. And that you can put cameras in there, you can put force fields all around a car. It's not going to stop an erratic child that just moves that quickly in the way. It was a tragic,
Do you think the one thing, and this is something that's come from the coroner's court, that children are always taught road safety? Perhaps parents should teach children that the driveway is actually an extension of the road, not part of the house.
But try teaching that to a 2-year-old.
These are very, very young kids. They're going to be taught anything. It's important we give the education program to the parents. And I think that when you're, as a parent, you've got to be responsible for all the actions of the kid. So if you're going to move the car, if you're the only person there, why not put the child in the car or the children in the car so you know where they are? It's no good thinking about relying on security cameras or whatever it may be. You know, the reality is we've got to be mindful of the kids there, and I think we should be very conscious of the fact that we need to separate our driveways from the play areas. And if you're moving the cars, you've got to be super sensitive. Look, I've got grandchildren, and on the weekend I remember backing out of the driveway of my home in Horsham, and the grandchildren were there, but I made sure there was a parent with each child and drove out safely. So it's
the driveway
it's
in
about
Horsham
education.
will probably be about 2 kilometres long, though.
Oh, no, it wasn't quite that long. but importantly, though, it's about educating the parents. And I think we all get into a busy lifestyle. We jump in the car and just back. Children move very quick. A 2-year-old can move very quick. It is a tragic event, and my condolences are for the families. It's a very, very sad occasion.
There are some interesting statistics which have been put out by the coroner's court. We'll bring them up for you now. Children between the ages of 1 and 3 were most at risk of being involved in driveway-related fatalities, accounting for 69% of child driveway deaths. A four-wheel drive utility or truck was involved in 77% of all driveway deaths reviewed. 54% of the deaths occurred between the hours of 5 and 8 p.m. 31% of the deaths occurred between the hours of 10 a.m. Almost half the deaths occurred in December and February each year. So they seem to be very busy times, particularly 5 to 8 and 7 to 10. It's when people are pretty much, parents are probably very busy, a lot going on in their minds, getting to work, getting the kids to school.
Ahron, I think you've highlighted, look, statistics are there, but one child is too many. The loss of one child, it's an enormous tragedy for that family, and particularly for the grandmother involved and all that type of thing. Look, it's very important we are conscious of our children. They are the most valuable assets we've got. Be aware of it. There's things you can do to protect your play areas from driveways and all that type of thing. But at the end of the day, as parents and adults, we've got to be mindful of these children. We can't educate these 2-year-olds that they can be trained a little bit. But at the end of the day, we as parents or adults, we've got to be mindful of what's the children around us.
Since we're on the topic of something related to the police, I want to perhaps use, as we're heading towards the end of the program, just to talk a little bit about some of the industrial action that we're seeing with the police at the moment, particularly in regards to speeding fines. More industrial action is going to kick in today, just ahead of the grand final. Do you think drivers will be perhaps less concerned about police on the road, given that this industrial action is being taken?
I think it's unlikely. I think most drivers exercise their behaviour responsibly. It's just a very small group of people who might take advantage of the situation, and that's unfortunately the situation we face.
And Matt, do you think it's a good look for the police?
Look, that's a matter for the police. They've obviously got their own reasons for doing it. Do I think that people will take advantage of it? Absolutely not. As Tim said, there'd be a very small percentage that would, and they're ratbags anyway.
Okay, and we are at the end of the program, so now it is time for final thoughts. All right, final thoughts. I'll ask the topic. Hopefully we'll get through 3 questions. I'll start with you on this one. First thing that comes to mind, Coles has announced that they are slashing the price of meat. Is that good or bad for competition? Is it good or bad for the people who produce meat?
Good for competition, good for cheap food, good for consumers.
Hugh?
Bad for producers, I believe, because at the end of the day they'll screw the farmers down, and I don't think that's fair. But I think of the barbecues and good lifestyle, but it's important to eat meat, as Sam Kekovich said.
Matt?
So long as the farmers aren't being cut out, then it's a win for consumers.
This week we heard from the Lord Mayor. He said that people in the suburbs were afraid of coming to the city. Matt, do they have any reason to be?
If you walk down Swanson Street or Flinders Street at any time from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, absolutely.
Hugh?
No, look, centre of Melbourne's a great place. It's the hub of Victoria, and we're all very proud of it. I think more people should come and have a look at it.
And Tim?
Ultimately, traffic's a bigger problem, I reckon, than safety. But
just trying to get people into the city.
Just getting them into the city. But it's also about time of day, and the reality some parts are more safer than others.
And just finally, tenants threatening to leave Docklands. Can we blame them? And what could Vic Urban do to make Docklands a nicer place?
Put more trees in and build a greater sense of community, but that has to happen organically. Vic Urban can't do that.
Hugh?
Look, it'll grow. It'll grow, and I think it'll grow a heart, and I think it'll. Reality is we need a big windscreen to stop the wind coming from Warrnambool.
And Matt, it's an interesting point, Docklands, isn't it? Because most parts of the city did grow organically. A pub was put on the corner because there was a need for a pub on that corner. In Docklands, they're trying to put booze barns in. I mean, is it a different way of thinking?
It is that looking at where it's come over 10 years, it's impressive. Do I think it's actually on the right track? No. Like Tim, I think it needs more parkland, it needs more space. Will it happen organically? No. Vic Urban have to do something about it. It's a wasteland.
Okay, thanks guys. That is a Melbourne Report for this week. Have a great day tomorrow. As I said, Loretta Johns and the team will take you through all the action from the MCG from tomorrow morning. You can catch this episode across the weekend on the Sky News Melbourne channel or the internet. I'm Ahron Young. Thanks again to our panel. We hope to see you here next week.